All right, welcome back. This is WUB, Wake Up Belize Morning Vibes for the 24th day of June 2021. And we are honored to have as our guest this morning, our first guest, Mr. Keith Gilges. He is the Charge d'Affaires for the United States of America. And this is not his first time here on WUB, but he is about to exit, meaning he's leaving Belize in the next, maybe within a month's time. And he's doing his exit interviews to share with Belizeans some of his experiences here and give us some insights on American policy here in the country of Belize. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you very much, Nuri. Thank you for having me on. It's really bookending my tour here that I started with an interview with you way back when I was still a newbie Belizean, and now at nearly my 3-year mark. It's nice to be back, so thanks for having me on.
It is an honor. It's an honor. For those who don't know anything about you, maybe we could start there. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. I know that you're a Korea diplomat, and so let's start there.
Well, you know, I've done my 3 years here in Belize, and I can't believe that I'm already leaving in, as you mentioned, in less than a month.
Yes.
So lots of little things piling up on the personal side, you know, the packing out, organizing the dogs, all that in order to leave. But it has been the honor of my career, of my life so far, to have this opportunity to serve in this role here in Belize, and I'm incredibly grateful for all the warmth and of the Belizean people, the opportunities to get around and see this incredible country. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. But yeah, so my career prior to this, I had served in the White House as Director of North America for a year before coming here. I was in the Office of Canadian Affairs. Before that, I served in Trinidad and Tobago and Kenya, Mozambique, Brazil, Hong Kong, and then I worked for some nonprofits back in the early 90s prior to joining the government. And I'm looking forward now to going back to Washington for a year where I will learn French. I'll be in French class intensively for the better part of a year. And then we'll be heading out as the Deputy Chief of Mission to our embassy in Bujumbura, Burundi.
Ah, so you're going to Africa.
I'm going to Africa back to Africa.
Interesting, interesting. Remind me, I might be off, but I thought that you had some experience in law enforcement, didn't you?
No, but it certainly feels like the amount of time that I've spent here working on security issues that I've developed a bit of a background in it. So, you know, in my position, in past positions as a political officer, I was frequently focused on issues of narcotics and law enforcement and working with groups. But again, it was from the capacity of understanding what's going on, trying to see what resources we can bring to bear, working with our law enforcement partners to bring those sort of capacity building, training, and equipment efforts on the ground in various countries that
Very good. Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself because national security and crime is one of the areas that I want to hear your experience with here in Belize. But let's go back again to a personal look at Keith. I know that you've interacted with Belizean people and you certainly have a feel for the diversity that you've met. We tend to look at ourselves all with a one, but when you take a close examination, you can sense a uniqueness in our diversity. So what has been your experience there?
Oh, you know, having the opportunity to meet people throughout the country, and for a country, and I will tell Americans, you know, my fellow Americans, that Belize is a country about the size of New Jersey with about 400,000 people in it. But within that, there is this remarkable diversity. You know, from the Keys and the ecosystems out there through the Maya Mountains, up north, the plains, I mean, all these amazing things in a relatively compact space. But then on top of that is the diversity of the people and the opportunity to celebrate with the Garifuna community for Resettlement Day, being down there, to be going down south and meeting with Maya community leaders. I was just down there, down in Toledo a couple months ago, and we went to a chocolate farm, or a cacao farm, and the woman there was using what she said was probably about a 900-year-old stone to actually grind and it's sort of amazing to see that is living history, that stone is not sitting in a museum. She is using it. She gave me an opportunity to try my hand at it. I was not very good. I will have to admit that. There is some skill behind what she had been doing. And I mean, those opportunities to get out from behind the desk, take off the tie, and be able to interact with folks is something that I've been very fortunate to be able to do.
Yes. Take off the tie. I wonder you hit me with something there, because it seems as most of your optics you've had on your tie in such a hot climate. Is that a requirement for your office, or what's going on?
Not at all. You know,
I think you're doing a lot of wire bearer and short sleeve shirts and short pants and
There's the me that's showing up for formal events, and you know, I sort of joke when somebody says, "Hey, Keith, can you come to this event?" And I'm like, "Well, am I coming as the chargé or am I coming as Keith?" And that basically sort of dictates how I'm going to dress. So if I'm coming as the chargé, I'm usually in the big car with a flag on it, and I'll have a blazer or something on.
I see.
The rest of the time, as people in Belmopan will well know, I'm in shorts and a t-shirt at the grocery store, hanging out at the tennis court, seeing people as I'm walking around the ring road.
Yes,
so the folks that see me there see the real me driving my own car. I'd like to think that me and the me in the big car are the same person, and I got the same personality. And so wear the tie for the formal things like coming to see you, and then the tie goes on.
That's why I was hoping that you wouldn't be so formal when you came to see us, but we're glad that you're here anyhow. What has been your most memorable experience in, I guess there's been a diversity of different events and circumstances over the last 3 years, but what sticks out?
Oh, because of how frankly amazing Belize is, I've had the opportunity to have dinner and have over, the Prime Minister, members of the Cabinet, members of the Senate, and have those sort of formal high-level engagements, but really get to know people one-on-one. And then I've also had the opportunity to meet folks out in the community. And one of my first lunches that I just went to the market in Belmopan and sat at a table and met some folks and had a great lunch. And 2 years later, 2.5 years later, I'm out at a hotel and I ran into the guy and he's like, "Hey, we had lunch." And I was like, at the Belmopan market. And having that opportunity to then reconnect, talk to somebody that I'd gone scuba diving with back in my first few months here, and then ran into him at the Shell station on the Hummingbird Highway, and we ended up chatting for a little bit and seeing what's going on and hearing from him the struggle with the lack of tourism, how he's had to shift professions and has gone back to an area and has grown his own crops and food, and that's the great opportunity that I have to understand better what's going on when I'm able not just to talk to the people at the highest levels of government, but to talk to people on the street, to understand their stories. And that's what I said when I first came here in a welcome video, that I was like, "Come on up and talk to me. I want to hear your stories." And I've had the good fortune to be able to do that over these 3 years.
You represent a country, dynamic and very powerful country, with a very powerful and interesting history, of course, particularly within this region. The country's history, your country's history is amazing, going back over 200 years. But over the last 5 years, the president, whom you came under his tenure, that is former President Trump, has had an amazing, if I could use that kindly, reputation worldwide. And clearly here in Belize, we've had, especially in the media, some very strong criticism about some of his policies, both globally and domestically. How has it been for you representing the United States during a Trump era?
Well, I had spent a year of my career inside the Trump White House, so I was able to come with a pretty good understanding of here are the priorities that the president, this administration, placed on our foreign policy. And let's be honest, they weren't that different from other priorities. And oftentimes we can see the person at the top, whether it's President Trump, President Biden, President Obama, has the opportunity to push in a certain direction, to say, listen, for President Trump, migration was more important. I wasn't talking about climate change. So those were some shifts. And in previous careers, you look at it, but the basic areas that we were working on, citizen security, good governance, economic prosperity, those didn't change. Most of what we didn't change, but there was just a shift in emphasis, a greater focus on some things versus others. So you can often hear the person at the top saying an awful lot, but as that filters down to what are the priorities for the government, that doesn't change that much. And it may seem like there were large differences, but sitting in the chair and directing things, I said, yeah, these were the focuses of the plan prior to the president coming in. Here's how we're going to tweak and make this more important and that a little bit less important. But we are still working across the broad range of issues that we're partnering with the Belizean government and the Belizean people on. And that didn't change as much as people would think.
But you had to come and deal with us, referred to as shithole country, and be, in fact, the charge d'affaires representing a country whose leader called us a shithole country.
I don't think that was directed at Belize in any way.
Well, it said it was referring to most small countries of which we felt offended by.
And fair enough, I was able to also say a lot of what happens in Washington is directed within Washington or is directed to a domestic audience. And listen, nobody's going to doubt that the former president had a way with words and had a capacity
but words
to,
mean something, especially in
listen, I'm a diplomat. I
words are very important.
Fully appreciate the importance and the power of words.
Yeah.
And I sort of come from an organization that is conservative about its use of words, that is careful about what's said, that thrives on nuance and understanding the complexity.
Precisely.
The style of the former president was much more direct. And I think you could see how he had a capacity to drive a news cycle here or there. There was a shift, from how Washington operated under the prior administration to how it's operating under the Biden administration. Not going back to anything before, but there's an effort to move forward. And frankly, this president brings probably the most foreign policy experience of any president in U.S. history.
Indeed.
And I think we're seeing that play out in our re-engagement in the World Health Organization, in our re-engagement in the global climate change issues and all that. So he's bringing a tremendous amount of foreign policy experience.
Well, let's hope that he's new and he has Kamala Harris, and we'll see exactly where that goes, because there is, in fact, a consistency in the American foreign policy despite the personality of who is in the White House. But a shithole country is very offensive, and a thinking that we who are outside of the United States and desperately trying to get into the United States, called immigrants, are treated with the kind of loose words was very offensive to many of us, which should not necessarily fall on your shoulder. However, you are representing that country. I
represent the administration chosen and elected by the American people.
Indeed.
And I will always do that to the best of my ability. I choose my words a little more carefully.
Yes, okay, indeed. You had an opportunity also to look at our ongoing border issue with Guatemala. And your country has had a relationship with both countries, Belize and Guatemala. Of course, when you compare your relationship with us and Guatemala, it is very clear that Guatemala has earned a significant amount of attention from your government in terms of its military, in terms of its general business climate. It's, to a large extent, an extension of American businesses, etc., that does exist in that country. But when it comes to the dispute itself, historically, it wasn't a very good one. You abstained from supporting our independence for many, many years. You, in fact, had a diplomat named Webster that, in fact, encouraged Guatemala to be in charge of Belize and our foreign affairs, etc. You supported a thing called the Heads of Agreement. So to a large extent, you come from a historical, not so good relationship when it came to our Guatemalan Belize dispute. Clearly over the last 10 or more years, that has changed significantly. In fact, even 20 years, it's been changed significantly. How do you see now the situation where Belize has finally agreed, along with Guatemala, to take this ongoing dispute to the ICJ? And what role has America played and is still playing when it comes to that dispute?
Sure. Let me address your first couple comments, if I may. Yes, we have close ties with Guatemala, a large Guatemalan population that lives in the U.S., and we've had strong diplomatic relations with them for a long time, as we have with Belize. And I would argue, in fact, that the affinity and the natural relationship between the United States and Belize is as strong as any. And so many Belizeans have American relatives. The number of tourists that come to Belize from the U.S. is far greater. When I was coming down here, and I would tell people, hey, I'm going to Belize. Everyone I spoke with said, oh, I've been there. I went there on a cruise ship, or I went there on my honeymoon. I went diving. And so the opinion, the expressed belief about Belize in the U.S. from everyone I spoke with was so incredibly positive. When you start talking about other parts of Central America, frequently the first response is, ooh, drugs, gangs, problem, violence, irregular migration, all those different things. So I think really when you look at it, there is this huge affinity in the U.S. for Belize. It's also sort of the nearest mainland place that speaks English. So there are a lot of Americans, when they say, hey, we want to go somewhere, they come here. So I would argue, our relationship with Belize is as strong as any other country in the region.
Well, that's the reason why I made a distinction between the last 10, 15, 20 years and historically, because the Webster proposal goes back to the 60s. The promise of Kennedy to, in fact, look softly on Guatemala taking over Belize because of the assistance that the Guatemalan were able to help with what was called the Bay of Pigs incident. Those are historical incidents which cannot be forgotten.
No.
But recently, certainly, we are almost becoming the Cancun type of approach to a lot of Americans. They are seeing Belize for the first time, and certainly there has been a difference in policy. So I was giving that backdrop to look at what today is your position when it comes to the fact that we finally, we're now at ICJ. It's no longer listening to Webster or listening to Heads of Agreement. It's now the two countries deciding to take this matter to the ICJ.
It is, and let me also say, hey, listen, our focus always has to be remember our past, learn from it, do better where we need to. And I think that is certainly in this region, we've learned a lot, we've made a lot of mistakes, and I think we're doing things better now than we did at some points in our history. In terms of the ICJ, listen, we were involved with the other friends of Belize and Guatemala in the creation of the special agreement back in 2008, and the referendum to take the issue to the ICJ was the sort of gradual growth out of that. And so, I was fortunate to arrive in the middle of 2018 when we were ramping our efforts to help the Belizean people educate themselves about the referendum. And again, we did not take a position one way or the other. That was an issue for the Belizean people to decide. But we were very clear that here is the best information that we can work with Belizeans to provide, go through an education campaign to make sure that people are making that decision based on the facts of the case, not on fear surrounding it. And in the end, the Belizean people voted 65% turnout rate, which is pretty fantastic when it's not associated with an election. It was just the referendum. 55% said they're in favor of going to the ICJ, 45% said no. So at that point, Belize came together and said, okay, we now need to work on our case and move that to the ICJ. So in some ways, for me, it moved to a bit of a back burner issue. it's there, the referendum's done, it's now moved into a legal process, so it won't involve any, direct engagement by us.
Yeah.
My key issue to always keep an eye on was to ensure that there aren't issues on the Sarstoon River or issues in the adjacency zone, on Belize's western border that would cause something to flare up, that would remove the political space for there to be a resolution at the ICJ.
Yeah. Well, just before we close on the ICJ, one of the criticism that was levied at your government, certainly at a street level, was that the amount of resources that you did provide to the government was in fact to ensure a yes vote, where there was a significant amount of no, but the no vote had absolutely no assistance to try to educate people from the position of the alternative to going to the ICJ. So while your government did assist in the process of education, it was assisting on a biased position that the government had already accepted that this was the best position, and the opposition to that, if I could use that term, was left pelenki, to use a Belizean term, without any kind of substantial support, whereas some criticized that had it been an even field, then the U.S. would have said, listen, we are going to provide some resources for both sides, so that the argument for the going and the argument against going would be not necessarily equal, but certainly you would have heard a little bit more from the no side, but it was not there. It was
so let me
left
be
to
clear.
legacy.
We provided no resources to the government of Belize.
Oh, but you
Zero.
provided it. You provided
Zero. We provided it to civil society organizations to get information out. And so the information that was provided didn't say vote yes or vote no. It said, here is what this means. Here is what is in the agreement. Here is what voting yes or voting no could mean. And so use that information to make a decision. We never took sides. We never gave any money to either a yes campaign or a no campaign. We worked through civil society and NGOs to provide money and information. But that's it. And so we didn't take sides. You'll note I never said, ever, vote yes. I said, get the best information you can, find the best sources, and do it based on the facts of what's there, not on what some would argue, in some instances, was a bit of fear-mongering. Listen, when I talk to senior policymakers, oftentimes, whether they were, on the yes campaign or the no campaign, a lot of it frequently at the senior level was, well, no, because no, not now, we have concerns about the process. It wasn't, no, we don't want to go to the ICJ for an awful lot of people. And those are private conversations that I'd have. And so I said, but if there's an alternative to whatever process, that's up to Belize to figure out. But in the meantime, our support to the education campaign was just to get information out and available to people.
Well, I won't prolong that because we are already at the ICJ, and I can tell you almost for sure that there was no funds available from any NGO that did not support going to the ICJ.
And
but
we didn't give money to NGOs that
maybe
said,
maybe they should have written a proposal to ask you for some of that money. But as I said, we are already at the ICJ, and that's water under the bridge. But what is not under the bridge is this pandemic that is growing worldwide to the point where the G7 had to make that a part of their agenda. The recognition that the majority of the world's population has not been vaccinated. And despite the fact that developing countries such as yours, even though not completely vaccinated, are far more covered with vaccination than developing countries. And the recognition that if a substantial amount of effort is not made to vaccinate the rest of the world, that even though your country is vaccinated, it would almost be null and void because you will have a larger population outside of these developed countries that are still infected and therefore will impact those countries that are supposedly inoculated. And so there's been a decision of the G7, and certainly Mr. Biden made it very clear that a substantial amount of effort will now be made to try to share vaccine access to developing countries. Can you talk specifically about how that will roll out to Belize? I know about the COVAX, but is there going to be a specific American effort to put vaccines available to Belize?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the president announced on June 10th that we would be providing 500 million doses, and it will go beyond that. You know, as we vaccinated folks in the States, and every government has a responsibility to their own citizens. And so there was a huge rollout effort. But while our numbers in the States of people getting vaccinated per day has come down, you know, we've gotten the easy ones. We've gotten the folks that said they wanted to be vaccinated. We're very eager to get it. So vaccines are now available. There's now an effort to reach those communities that have been more hesitant to do it. But we're at over 50% of the US population. Frankly, that's good economically for Belize, because once Americans can travel, they make up the bulk of the tourism that comes here. So Belize's tourism sector is starting to rebound in many ways thanks to vaccination within the US. The production levels are still continuing to increase. So the facilities in the US and around the world are making more and more of the vaccine, so it's becoming more widely available. So the initial announcement on June 3rd that we would be sending out 80 million doses. 6 million will be coming to this region. We are also giving over $4 billion to COVAX to purchase vaccines. So yes, there is now a global effort to try and move vaccines to where they're most needed. And we, the US government, will do that largely through COVAX. So we're not going to say, yeah, we pick you, you, and you. We're saying the COVAX facility, you know, organized by the UN, is the best way to figure out where can these vaccines make the most difference. And so we are part of that global community that's doing that. We do have some doses that we'll just distribute directly, and the easiest way is to get those out. I don't know yet, and there's been no announcement yet, on exactly how many doses are going to which country. Again, some of that will be announced through COVAX, and some of that should be announced directly because we'll be trying to get those out and distribute them in the near future. You want to get it right. You want to make sure that when the decision's made for how we're doing it, and we've got the capacity, that we announce it and it happens right and it happens quickly. So there will be doses coming to Belize. I just don't know when, but hopefully pretty soon, right, Adam? We haven't heard anything yet. So you know, I'm paying attention to the cable traffic coming into me to see anytime there's any mention of it. We are parsing those words to try and figure out, okay, can we inference anything from this about timelines? And at this point, I just don't have anything to announce. But I think when we do, it'll happen quickly.
There is a certain amount of hesitancy which can be seen worldwide, in fact. We used to think it's only here in the West, but I read something on AP Line recently about India and how Indians who live in the rural areas really are afraid. And 2/3 of India are in the rural areas, and they still have not been successful because of this hesitancy. We see hesitancy in the United States, and we are having many of our people here who are hesitant for whatever reason. Some legitimate and some by conspiracy, but some people have legitimate reasons why.
Well, and some people might be allergic to some of the ingredients in the vaccine.
Clearly.
If you are sick at the time you go in to get a vaccine, they might say, okay, hold off, you know, get over whatever flu or thing you have. So, so there can be reasons why some people won't get vaccinated. But when it's based just on the fear and misinformation that's spreading on social media, that's what, you know, credible voices need to try and counteract. And if people are saying, well, I want to wait. I want to wait and see what happens. Okay, we've vaccinated over 150 million people in the U.S. And you hear about the rare occasion, very rare occasional thing that somebody has a particular thing about their body. It makes a difference. But 150 million, and there aren't a bunch of stories. So that to me is one of the best arguments to people. If you're worried, it's a safe vaccine. We've shown that.
Well, even though we depend so much on science to guide us. There's so many unpredictables when it comes to science. Just yesterday, we have a report of a 5-day-old baby, a 15-day-old baby that contracted the virus in the Orange Walk town, which defies the science again, and tells you why a lot of people are not that much relying on science, because they're still...
Science never said babies can't get COVID.
Oh, no?
It's a virus.
Well, it certainly gave the impression that we don't need to vaccinate younger people, because younger people very rarely will contract the disease.
We
That's one of the
absolutely
positions.
want to vaccinate younger people, without a doubt. So it's a
Do you
question
think
of the
starting
clinical trials.
as early as measles vaccinations?
I don't know, and that where, let me not step beyond what my knowledge is, but at this point the Pfizer vaccine has been approved for 12 to 18-year-olds. So it took a while. Started with adults, there's more information, there's more capacity, the clinical trials are happening. So we were able to get emergency use authorization to vaccinate adults. They continued with clinical trials looking at 12 to 18. Pfizer has now been approved for emergency use authorization, so we can start vaccinating the 12 to 18-year-olds, which is another chunk of so many populations. The clinical trials are ongoing for 5 to 12, and you just can't speed these up. The clinical trials take as long as they take to make the determination that, in fact, okay, at this point, which one of these vaccines now has approval, has been shown to be safe in clinical trials, and now we can start vaccinating 5 to 12. I don't know, and again, I'm not a medical doctor, under 5 what the rules are, but they'll be looking at it. But nobody ever said there are people who are naturally, if you're under a certain age, you can't get COVID. No, you can. And they've shown more and more that younger people are starting to get some of the variants in the States, which makes it more important for them to be vaccinated as well. What we saw was that when younger people get it, they're less likely to get it in a severe way, and they're less likely to have the major complications that require intubation and lead to death. So while younger people would get COVID, they were better. The folks that were older, the 55s and up, the greater likelihood of somebody older getting COVID and suffering much greater complications was higher. So the vaccination starts with them. But we're pushing it down younger and younger. So the fact that a baby got it, that's possible. Hopefully that baby will, I certainly hope, make a full recovery. And we've seen it very infrequent that COVID caused death in the young.
Well, my comment or question was really related to hesitancy and the fact that we've been relying significantly on the science. And the science has given us the impression, perhaps not intentionally, but certainly we drew the conclusion that if you're a younger person, you may not have to worry about it. Certainly if you're a baby of just days old, you certainly don't have to be concerned about it. But the science is learning as it goes along that in fact it can happen. My reasons for talking about hesitancy. Well, let's look also at this new strain called Delta, which seems to be a new rise and a new reason for concern. I understand in your country, the state of Missouri is looking at it in an alarming way, the amount of persons who have this, and in other countries likewise. What's your thoughts on this new wave, or this new variant?
Viruses are clever, and the more people that get a virus, the greater likelihood that there might be a new mutation that comes out of that. As it replicates, things mutate, and if one of them proves to be a more virulent or more dangerous strain, yes, then the likelihood of it spreading goes up. What we've seen is that the vaccines that are out, certainly the AstraZeneca, the Pfizer, the Moderna, the Johnson & Johnson, are effective against the variants. Now, nothing's 100%. Hey, I've been vaccinated with the Moderna vaccine, so I have a 90% chance that it will be effective. There's still, functionally a 10% chance that I could contract COVID, so we still have to be careful. If I did, it would be asymptomatic to mild symptoms. So the likelihood that at this point I could contract COVID and have severe reaction to it is then much lower. It's just a small, tiny percentage of that 100%. So the variants are a concern. What's good about the science is the mRNA technology they're using to say, okay, this is the new variant. The pharma companies can tweak the vaccinations just a little bit to make it effective against that variant. So science is playing it's a competition in many ways between the vaccines and the variants for ensuring a healthy population. And obviously, the virus wants to replicate and spread because that's its nature. And we'll do our best, the pharmaceutical companies, the countries, to try and ensure that there are effective vaccines against those variants.
Just before we move away from that, Mr. Gilges, is to also look at the role that capitalism has played in the equal distribution of the vaccines, where these patents really prevented the widespread production of these vaccines. And there had to be efforts to rein in these patents and to allow a more liberal movement of production so that the world can survive.
Sure.
Is that an indictment in a way against free enterprise and making sure that I can hold on to my patent and you have to go through me in order for you to get it, as opposed to looking at it from a more humanitarian position and saying, guess what, this is not a time to be trying to make money. This is a time to save us all. And so therefore, there should be a massive production of these vaccines in order to save the world. Give me your personal thought and also your diplomatic position.
Sure. Well, they're the same thing. Fortunately, in this, totally understand the effort to say, hey, there is this capacity to produce, and let's try and ensure that we are ramping up production everywhere and that vaccines become readily available. And I know, the Biden administration has said they're looking to the companies to say and support an effort to free up some of this intellectual property. But don't forget that it was the billions of dollars invested by Pfizer, by Moderna, by these other companies in the private sector to develop these vaccines. It was not the public sector that did it. It was the private sector. And while the second vaccine that you produce might only cost $1 or $2, the first vaccine cost billions. That level of investment that had to come in. So while the government was involved, through something called Operation Warp Speed, it wasn't government money that was doing it. It was private sector money. It was the pharma companies.
But the counter to that is that, in fact, for one super bomber, you're really talking about billions of dollars of public money in order to make a super bomber which bombs people and kills people. Why not prioritize and say, instead of sending billions on military hardware, to transfer that public money of billions of dollars into the production, rather than say, well, Pfizer is a private company and they have to recover their money, and therefore we could have turned that around on the basis of a humanitarian position that the world's population will be halved if we don't do something very, very fast. That's the argument.
There are things that government does well, and there are things that the private sector does well.
I see.
And so it's a question not of one or the other, but is where do we get the best efficiency?
But isn't it that the reason why is because they didn't have money?
$4 billion in buying vaccines so that we can distribute them. I think that's what you're talking about.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the argument is, as your premise was, that because Pfizer and these Moderna and Johnson, etc., had to invest billions of dollars in order to come up with the vaccine and therefore have to recover their money, and that the public production of these things did not produce the vaccine because they didn't have that amount of investment. I'm saying that the military-industrial complex, which is run by public money, could have prioritized and use that money to invest in the production of vaccines that would have surpassed what these private companies were doing and be able, instead of bombing and killing people, to be able to save lives. It's it's an argument.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not sure who you're talking about that we're bombing instead of
I'm
doing
saying
something.
I'm saying that one
listen,
one
we
of
do-
these
we
one
do
of these
have
super
money.
bombers.
We
one
do
of these,
have money. What's super bomber?
Oh,
You
you
mean one
don't
of
you
our
don't you don't know
F-35?
you don't know that some of
planes?
these bombers and some of these high-tech military weapons cost billions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's public
and
money.
that is what our defense budget is for.
That's
for us
public
to
money.
say,
Yes.
let's take people that aren't specialized in medicine or vaccines and tell them go produce a vaccine. Doesn't make sense.
You
to
could
me.
have you could have put
go to
it
the
you could have put it
experts.
into Pfizer's scientists and say, listen, I know that you're making money, but we're going to reduce the amount of money that we're putting in our defense budget, and we're going to ensure that you have money, and you produce that for us so that we can ensure that we save the world, half of the world's population. It's just an argument, but I don't want to
But-
prolong it. I don't want to prolong it because
But
it's only,
in all fairness,
I'm trying to balance
we do
it,
make priorities within how we spend money. And yes,
clearly.
we spend a fair amount on our public defense,
Mm.
for which an awful lot of the world is grateful because
Mm.
we keep shipping lanes open as a result of our Navy.
Mm.
We do help in so many ways, but to argue that our defense budget should have been shifted to Pfizer, no, the answer is how can we ensure that vaccines are produced as efficiently as possible in the best way possible and get them out as quickly as possible is a separate conversation to me than what we're investing in an F-35 fighter
Yeah.
plane.
And I understand your position, and it's diplomatically correct in the sense that you do justify that what you do militarily does save lives. But I suggest to you, Mr. Gilges, that we've seen over 6 million people died as a result of COVID. And that means that that money, which saves some thousands of people, could have been directed to save millions of people. But I don't want to prolong it.
But
I don't want to
I'm not
prolong.
willing to accept that
All right,
premise
go ahead.
just because, listen, the U.S. was affected more by COVID than any other country for a very long time. We
Indeed.
still have the highest number of deaths.
Indeed.
And
Hence the
there
reason
was
why
nothing
you
that
should
the
have been.
National Guard
you
of
should have
the
made
United
it.
States or the Army or the Navy could have done to prevent that virus from getting around.
I'm only
That's
talking
the
about
science.
expenditure. I'm talking about expenditure based on your premise that Pfizer and Moderna and these others had to recover because they invested billions of dollars and the public sector did not. I'm saying that the public
Yeah.
sector does have control over its defense budget.
Correct.
And could have prioritized its defense spending to ensure that Pfizer got public money, as you do in many cases, public money to ensure, for the sake of saving humanity and the millions in the United States, there are over 600,000 in the United States, to ensure that money was dispensed
Sure.
in that area.
I think we can do both, and I
Okay.
think we did do both.
All right, well,
and
let's-
with the millions
let's-
we're investing in getting vaccines around
You're-
to the world, I think we're capable of doing both.
Your time here is valuable and I cannot afford to stay on just one area. If we go again to the military expenditure, over the last 25, 30 years, especially under the umbrella of war against drugs, you have expended literally millions and millions of dollars in national
you can go into the
security.
Ds, I think.
In Belize, certainly billions of dollars.
Yeah.
In national security, I'm speaking specifically of Belize now.
Oh, millions.
And you have contributed to a war that had a premise in the United States and certainly those other countries, Belize being included, which resulted in a significant beefing up of our police, of our military, but it also had the side effect of more of our people ending up, especially young people, in jail, more of them being marginalized because of having police records and being criminalized while they were in prison. But when we compare it scale-wise, we see that you have invested millions in interdictions, etc., beefing up the whole military apparatus of the country, but very little in preventative care. You're doing it now, and I congratulate you particular for your initiatives. But certainly your predecessors and your country in general spent very little in preventative ways to ensure that there would not be a dependency on drugs as a means of making money, which, as you see, the statistics say that the majority of young people who are involved in drug production, not production, but sales and trafficking, etc., and use, is a result of the unemployment, the socioeconomic situations. You spent very little in that area, but a significant amount in the interdiction, the building up, the producing of more guns, the training for police officers, for military people, etc., etc. That dichotomy has had a tremendously difficult impact on Belize and perhaps other countries within the region. How do you, as a Korea diplomat, look at how that expenditure has unfolded over the last 25 years in Belize?
Sure. So I'm also going to dispute the premise a bit.
Okay.
That when you look at our strategic objectives, citizen security, economic prosperity, good governance, we have tried to balance those baskets. Part of what I try and do is say, what resources are available in the U.S.? Where are there pots of money that we can bring down here and try and have an impact? Has some of that been more weighted toward the citizen security side? Yes, partly because while we have a drug problem in the U.S., we are the consumers.
Huge.
The countries in Northern South America have a big drug problem. They're the producers. The problem here is the transshipment. And so where we're able to say, listen, we've got issues with consumption. We'd like to work with the countries of South America to reduce production. We'd like to work domestically to reduce consumption and drug dependency. And number three, we'd like to work with the countries that fall victim to the negative impacts of transshipment. And Belize is one of those countries. So when we look at it, we say, listen, we're not trying to skew our cooperation. We're trying to say this has such a corrosive impact upon Belize when drugs are transshipped through Belize heading north to the United States. So some people would argue, oh, well, just let it flow through. It's not a problem. But for every plane that lands, there are people on the ground who were paid to let that plane land. They have an interest in supporting the narco-trafficking trade, and that money starts to spread around. So it has an incredibly corrosive impact. So as I see it, we have a commitment to work with Belize to try and reduce that. Ultimately, it is the Belizean security forces that have the impact, whether that's the BDF, the police, the Coast Guard, any of those folks working together to try and make sure Belize does not become a permissive environment for more and more planes to fly in with their drugs, because that affects everything else. When we look at what we're working on, we give very little money directly to the government. When we look at our Central American Regional Security Initiative funds, a large portion of that is economic support funds. So every year we go out with a grant program, and I think we're in the process right now. I think grants are coming in. We get about $750,000 to $1 million per year. Right now, I think it's about $750,000. So we'll do 2 or 3 or 4 grants. They're all working on good governance. How can civil society work with the government to improve efficiency? Because again, if you get an efficient government, so many of the other things can come as a result of that. So we try and make sure that we have a broad range of programs that we work on. I will accept your argument that some of has it been more heavily weighted toward the citizen security side? Yes, a bit, but that's also, if I've got money and say, well, I don't have pots of money back in Washington that I can spend on these areas, but I do there, I'm not going to say, well, I need to balance that a little bit better, so I'll turn back that money. If there are opportunities to help make the police better at what they do, then we want to try and do that. If there are opportunities to provide training, and in some cases equipment, so that they're better at at community policing, they're better at getting out into the community, getting to know the people in those communities, and so it's not an adversarial relationship, we think that would be a really good thing. And so those are areas that we work on. certainly, I personally working with my public affairs staff in particular, we're able to put some money into the Empowering Communities to Empower Themselves program, where we've gone directly into Yarborough, into St. Martin, into George Street to work with former gang members, former inmates, as they are turning their lives around. And so again, that's an area that we've been able to provide some seed money to the Love Foundation, the Colby Foundation. I've been able to go out and meet with these folks, and it's pretty incredible what they're doing, and they in turn are mentoring other people. Is that our largest project?
No.
Were we able to come up with some money to do it? Yes. Is it making a difference? We hope so. But again, we're not trying to replace any line items in Belize's budget. It's Belize's responsibility to do these things. But where there are areas we can help, we try.
Yeah, my premise was not to question especially the latest efforts that you have made, and you have been on the ground. Very impressive. My question was about how much you have put into these areas. You've put in millions upon millions into the area of interdiction, beefing up citizen security, as you should call it. Would I suggest to you that empowering young people, ensuring that they don't need to go into a life of crime, is also citizen security? And so therefore maybe the rethinking will be going forward, that more money will be placed into such programs, and that you will go beyond just working with two organizations, because you seem to have focused only on two organizations, Colby and Love Foundation, when there's a myriad of other NGOs and also government initiatives out there that likewise need that assistance in doing exactly what has been done. And again, I have to commend you, because you've been on the ground. I've seen the optics of your congratulating those youths who have tried to make that transition. But my suggestion is that when you talk about millions upon millions and then you talk about 100,000 on this side, they don't match. And both of them should have been aimed at the same objective, which is citizen security, or citizen security.
Sure. We are also constrained by how Congress spends money. And at this point, we're seeing an effort now in the Northern Triangle region, in Guatemala, Honduras, to address the drivers that cause migration. And so that is clearly an area where this administration going forward is looking, again, yes, every country has a right to control its borders. I think Belize would be the first to agree to that.
Yes.
But to help prevent the reason why too many people will pick up and leave their home and make a somewhat arduous trek, through the Northern Triangle, through Mexico to get to the border. Wouldn't it be better if they were comfortable and safe and prosperous in their own homes, in their own region? And so trying to bring some resources to bear addressing those drivers. Again, what money is available and what Congress chooses to do with it. Alas, they don't just give me a big pot of money and I get to choose. I would love that. There's nothing I'd like more than to be the one who gets to decide exactly, where we're focusing all that money. What I do want to do is anytime I see something available, I want to jump on that pot and make sure that I'm trying to bring, listen, I am absolutely competing with my fellow chiefs of mission in the region for resources.
I'm sure.
And my job is to try and make the case why it's more important that we do these things in Belize. I will often tell folks, hey, listen, Belize is Mexico's other southern border, and it's just two borders and one highway away from the U.S. homeland, and that's a particular reason why it's so important that we invest here. We've got roughly 30,000 American residents here. So believe me, I'm making these cases back to Washington when I'm competing resources for the programs.
Well, please tell them that there are no caravans leaving Belize trying to get to the U.S.
And we'd like to keep it
and
that
the
way.
way to keep it that way, Mr. Gilges, is to ensure that perhaps I'm speaking to your subordinates who seem to be very narrow in their selection of how to help combat this. As I said, you cannot deal with just two organizations to select. Please. So. There's a wide range of efforts out here, and it would be good that your subordinates look and see that it's not just one or two making this effort. There are many out there making this effort. But let's move on.
But every grant we've done,
Yeah.
you know, there have been other organizations that that apply. So you know, we get three big grants a year.
Yeah.
And yes, we've had some folks that have been very successful because they write really good grants and they run good
They
programs.
know how to do it.
They know how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. But,
We hold programs with other folks to come in and say, hey, anybody that's interested, prior to the grant being offered,
Yeah.
here's what we expect, here's how to write grant proposals, here's all those different things. We absolutely want to increase the pool
Yeah.
of organizations that come in. But ultimately, we also have to be accountable for U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Absolutely.
And if an organization doesn't have the capacity to manage that money properly, you know, they're going to score less well. But we absolutely are interested in promoting civil society and working with as many organizations as possible. And it's a rigorous process that we go through to score each of the grant proposals.
Clearly. There's another area that is a little sticky point for the United States at this time. You're calling upon our regional governments, and I've seen your comments directed at the government of Belize, on its position or non-position in regards to Nicaragua, and the fact that Nicaragua has been placing obstacles in the process of its democracy, arresting its opposition, and etc., etc. But while I think I understand that position, I would imagine that seeing what has been taking place in your country over the last recent history, certainly since the change of administration, what I would call an embarrassing display of an attempted insurrection on the 6th of January in the Capitol, at the Capitol building, and even more obscene, the efforts on the part of Congress to try to block black and brown voters from having their right to vote. It seems almost disingenuous. I'll stay away from hypocritical, but disingenuous to suggest that these countries are somehow interfering with democracy, or the concept or the ideal of democracy, when your country itself has displayed to us, the rest of the world, that you too are interfering with democracy, particularly in a country that has been, in the eyes of many, the bastion of a workable diplomatic or process of democracy.
Are you referring to Nicaragua?
I'm referring to the comments of your office.
But what was the workable democracy? Which country were you talking about?
I think that the United States has been a very dynamic, workable democracy.
Okay. I was about to ask.
And the fact that it has had some very embarrassing hiccups in that process.
Well, I think you're comparing apples with a chair. Okay. I'm not even going to put them as the same fruit.
Sure.
So what we saw in Nicaragua was, so far, every presidential candidate has been arrested. So that we're up to 5 now. Mm-hmm. You know, journalists are fleeing. If there's any sense that Nicaragua is heading down a democratic path, I think that's misbegotten. And so.
But I saw people rushing and threatening Nancy Pelosi. I saw people threatening to hang the Vice President, Mr. Pence. To me, that is obscene.
So I agree. I agree 100%, and those people are being prosecuted, and I hope they go to jail. Okay. What we saw on January 6th was a travesty. It reminds us all that liberty is something we must constantly fight for.
Clearly.
Democracy is not easy, and in many ways there will always be forces of authoritarianism that try and descend upon democracy for their own benefit. I would say that right now is Nicaragua. And the Danny Ortega and Vice President Murillo's efforts to stymie democracy in their own benefit is a travesty. And I appreciate Belize's statement in SICA to that end. I did not understand, and I still do not understand fully why Belize chose to abstain at the OAS. You know, as the foreign minister said, you know, Americans know why. And I'm like, okay, well, there are a lot of Americans, this one doesn't. And so to equate that with the fact that, yeah, in the end, we saw a travesty on January 6th in the US, and I was pitched in front of my TV just like everybody else, watching this horrific scene. It was a wake-up call for us. And it's a wake-up call for the fact that we need to be strong in our defense of our democratic institutions because they are so important. Ultimately, they helped. Ultimately, there was a peaceful change of government. Ultimately, a new president took office and a new Congress was installed. So to equate what happened in the US, yeah, wake-up call, understand it, realize it, need to work to try and prevent that sort of thing from happening again. But that's different from saying, well, because there was an insurrection on the Capitol Hill on January 6th, therefore we shouldn't do anything about what's happening in Nicaragua.
No,
I don't
wouldn't
make
say
that
that.
connection.
No, I wouldn't say. That's why I say it's not hypocrisy that I'm using. It's disingenuous, because you are witnessing, and we are witnessing, this effort to block voters. I mean, this is a very real situation that's happening as you and I are talking.
So there are efforts in some states in the U.S. to change
And
the
that's a
voter
part of
registration
democracy.
laws.
That's a part of democracy.
And so it is a constant effort to make sure, and certainly I fully support, and this administration fully supports the right of every American to be able to vote.
Clearly.
Voting should be something that is easy to do.
Yeah.
And listen, we have not seen any significant fraud in our elections. So our systems are strong and they're good, and democracy works. As it does in Belize.
Yeah.
You know, there was incredibly peaceful elections. They've always been peaceful here, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
There's the change of government, and there was a very significant change of government.
And no
you know,
former leader has ever gotten up and said, that's a fraud. As your former president said, that's a fraud.
Yeah.
So maybe we have some lessons to teach you.
Absolutely. Listen, this was never anything other than a partnership. And I've always said we have as much to learn as we do to teach.
Very good.
You know, I've certainly done an awful lot more learning in my 3 years here than I've done teaching. I hope that I've worked to expand the partnerships, to expand the areas that we're working on together, to expand our understanding. I mean, that's really been what my efforts have been about. And I appreciate vibrant conversation. I want to be able to come on your show and I want to trade ideas.
And I'm proud of
it's
you
never
to have
personal.
come as you have. Yeah.
It's never personal. We get to have these ideas back and forth.
Yeah.
I would argue if we went to the US, we can have this same conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm not sure we could do it in Nicaragua.
And I think I agree with you. There are some states that you could not have the freedom that we are exercising here now. Granted. And that is something that we must both keep alive and never be in a position to be accused of stifling free discussion and free speech. Mr. Gilges, as we come to the end, I want to thank you for your presence here. It's an exit interview, and we want to wish you the best. We hope that when you go to the continent of Africa, very challenging issues that you will face there, and we hope that the experience that you have gained with us here in Belize will strengthen your resolve in attacking and addressing, maybe better word, the issues that you will meet there. And I don't know if it is a possibility that you will go up the scale to ambassadorship. I don't know that that is even your ambition, but certainly I think you would make an excellent ambassador,
Thank you.
whether it is here in Belize or elsewhere. I want to thank you very much for your having been here.
Thank you very much, and thanks for these robust conversations. Thanks for having the opportunity. You know, we talk about some things that we may not agree on, which is great.
That's good.
But ultimately, there is so much more that we agree on that we don't.
Absolutely.
And we can say, listen, we're going to disagree on some things, but we
Yes.
don't let those disagreements define what our relationship
Indeed.
is.
Indeed.
And I would end with one last comment. If you talk to a Foreign Service officer and he or she says, it's not my ambition to be an ambassador one day, don't believe them.
All right, we'll end this at this time, and thank you very much for staying with us. We'll be back with a representative from the Community Counseling Center.
Shop Nobili is located at